Before over 60 years of story happened, all Spider-Man was a radioactive spider, a burglar, and an uncle, all of which a part of a series that wasn't even theirs. But why has this classic story survived the test of time? And how has its delivery changed over the decades? I'm Playmaster Plus, and welcome to the Web of Lore and Destiny, where today we're going to be taking a look at the ever evolving method of storytelling regarding Spider Man's origin story. This early part of the superhero's timeline is arguably one of the most recognizable for him, and it all started back in 1962 with the issue known as Amazing Fantasy 15. As I'm sure you all know, this story featured a 15-year-old Peter Parker, portrayed as being an outcast at his school and doted upon by his elderly aunt and uncle, who served as his parental figures. Upon attending a public showing of a science experiment involving radiation, a spider who was caught in the blast managed to bite Peter before dying, forever altering his DNA so that he would gain the proportional powers of a spider. Immediately realizing he could capitalize off of these new abilities, Peter begins a brief stint in show business, receiving an intriguing amount of pay for showcasing his powers. This is when his colorful suit was handcrafted, and also when he donned the name Spider-Man for the first time. Struck by arrogance in light of his newfound success, Peter refuses to stop an escaping criminal, seeing it as someone else's problem to deal with. He's had enough struggle in his life, so surely he's entitled to ignore any other potential strife. It's finally his time to be on top. However, he would soon be brought down from this high when he discovers that his uncle has been murdered by a runaway burglar. Fueled by a vengeful fury, Peter dons a Spider-Man costume to chase down a bad guy for the first time, soon cornering his uncle's killer in an old warehouse. Swiftly knocking him unconscious, Peter realizes the burglar is none other than the one he let escape. Racked by guilt, this is the night he learns the most vital lesson incorporated within the Spider-Man character. With great power, there must also come great responsibility. That was a quick overview, but I'm sure you're familiar with the story and we'll get a deeper analysis through the come and cross comparisons. Because as with any story that lasts for over half a century, there have been many retellings of this classic origin, and in this video we're about to look at some of my favorite deliveries of it. This is not an exhaustive list, just a mixture of what I find to be either iconic or creative within this theme. The main through line between the upcoming examples is that they all convey primarily the same key events as the classic origin, just deliver them to the audience in a unique way or with slight variation while all being popular within the mainstream. As such, the origins of characters like the Spider-Verse's Miles Morales or the MCU Spider-Man are disqualified because they're radically different from the classic origin. I think an intuitive place to start would be with the Toby Maguire Trilogy and the Andrew Garfield Duology, as they seem to have some of the biggest impact on people's perception of the origin, given their initial widespread impact and lasting cultural relevance. Both of them convey the origins in a rather traditional linear storytelling format, as the comics did, but have significant nuanced changes that provide slightly differing experiences. Toby's debut Spider-Man film is where we get the famous verbal delivery of the responsibility phrase from Uncle Ben himself.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
This went on to become, at least from what I've seen, the most iconic depiction of the vital Spider-Man moral. And funnily enough, it never even happened in the source material. In Amazing Fantasy 15, Uncle Ben never said anything of the sort, instead, the phrase appearing in the yellow box captions, essentially spoken by the narrator. He was still depicted as a kind and loving man, but the responsibility line specifically wasn't delivered from Ben's mouth back in 1962. Later on, the lesson of power and responsibility would be retroactively attributed to direct words and actions from Uncle Ben on multiple occasions in the comic book timeline, usually from the mind or mouth of Peter Parker himself, but nonetheless, the first Toby movie is where the specificity of this powerful moment involving Uncle Ben largely originates. Personally, I vastly prefer this method of delivering the "with great power there must also come great responsibility" mantra. It definitely ties the moral directly to the person whose death served as the catalyst for Peter's sway towards heroics, while providing an emotional scene to think back on. Other notable variations include the name of Spider-Man technically originating with the wrestling announcer,
The Amazing Spider-Man!
his webs being organic rather than created through the web shooter design.
Go, Web, go!
And of course, Mary Jane and Harry Osborn already being relevant characters. I do not care for the organic web change myself. Peter designing web shooters always felt like a good way to integrate his scientific knowledge into his power set in a continually present way, and doesn't require further suspension of disbelief than is already required by so drastically rewriting his more inner biology. However, I do have friends that argue the case that organic webbing is more consistent with the spider's power transfer and makes him feel even more superhero-ish from like a power perspective. I am interested in opinions about this, so do make sure to drop yours in the comments if you have a take on it. One of the more surprising variations from the original origin in the Toby movies is the fate of Uncle Ben's killer, who actually dies in the altercation with Peter. While Peter didn't truly kill him, as the burglar tripped and fell out the window after continually resisting capture, it always felt like an important early element to the no one dies obsession Peter carries with him in the comics to have the survival of Uncle Ben's killer be an element to the story. However, what I do like about this sequence of events is that the person overseeing the prize for the wrestling match essentially cheated Peter out of a lot of money, prompting him to vindictively let the burglar escape moments later.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
I don't necessarily like this better or worse than the simple arrogance Peter showcased in the comics. It just allows for a slightly different heart issue for Peter to examine, that being the potential ramifications for seeking vengeance. And yes, obviously there's the Sandman stuff in the third movie, but I'm not counting that as relevant for this particular discussion, since Peter was well established as a superhero by then. This theme is actually a perfect segue to the Andrew movies, as it is even more heavily present in his character arc. The initial sequence of events is quite familiar, substituting the wrestling event with a convenience store robbery.
Hey, man, stop! Somebody stop that guy! Hey, kids, little help? Not my policy.
The main thing to focus on before the fallout of Uncle Ben's death is the family dynamic portrayed in this film. The setup of this movie has always felt like a more real depiction of the Parker household. Down to earth conversations and reactions to the rapidly changing life of Peter, as well as his parents having a very strong presence in the character's psychology. While I find myself enjoying the Toby trilogy more than the Andrew movies in general, what I'll always love about the duology is I feel that it best captures the tragedy of Spider Man, translated very viscerally into live action. The origin fits into this praise nicely, tugging on the heartstrings even before Uncle Ben's death due to the family drama. Furthermore, in this timeline, Uncle Ben was only out of the house wandering the nighttime streets because of Peter's rebellious attitude following a parental guidance confrontation at the house minutes earlier. Combined with the fact that he also made no move to stop the burglar, it adds yet another element of magnitude to Peter's guilt. Perhaps the greatest variation directly tied to the classic origin is that Peter never catches Uncle Ben's killer in these films. There is a lengthy search for him, but Peter ultimately never tracks him down and forfeits the investigation to spend his time and energy on helping people instead. I like this a lot, as it really emphasizes Peter's arc of maturity and realizing that seeking vengeance is far less noble than utilizing one's powers and time to help others. Rather than Uncle Ben's killer being still out there feeling like a loose end, it serves to showcase this Peter's psychological and emotional development. With the major movie adaptations covered, let's now transition to the world of animation, where I've always believed some of the best Spider-Man stories live. The two we're going to take a look at today are the 90s cartoon simply titled Spider-Man and my favorite iteration of the Peter Parker character, Spectacular Spider-Man. The primary thing these two have in common regarding the delivery of the origin is the fact that neither bother starting with it. With Spider-Man being a popular enough character in both of these eras, it is entirely possible that knowing the origin was somewhat of a given for the average superhero cartoon consumer. But in general terms, opting to withhold the beginnings of a character served the story in two major ways: allowing the viewer to be placed right into the action without getting bogged down with too much exposition, and allowing for a certain amount of intrigue to be built around the beginnings of the timeline, therefore increasing viewer hype or attention. Both of these cartoons go the route of holding off and doing origin episodes until later in the series, with the reason for its memory resurfacing being rather unique. In the 90s cartoon, the episode in question is titled Make a Wish. There's a lot of surrounding context to this episode, but what matters to the subject of this video is that Peter receives a letter from the parents of a young girl who is Spider-Man's self-proclaimed #1 fan. requesting that he fulfill her dream of meeting him. Later environmental clues suggest that this girl doesn't have much longer to be on this earth, adding a tragic dimension to the Make-A-Wish title. But it does make the moment all the more special when she reveals her collection of Spider-Man memorabilia and asks questions surrounding his life. It is here that Peter himself becomes the narrator of his own story, as we get the classic origin through the lens of him explaining his personal history to this girl. The following sequence of events are highly reflective of the versions we've already covered, with a couple of addendums to mention. One concerns the web again, with this Spider-Man having to design web shooters as most do, but he provides this interpretation of how he did it.
Wow! You must be super smart to think this stuff up.
I think when I was bitten, the spider passed on an instinctive knowledge of how to combine certain enzymes to make this strong, sticky webbing.
He also has this feverish dream sequence after the bite, in which he has turned into a spider monster, which is consistent with other developing plot elements in the show. I think the web thing is actually a nice bridge between the scientific mindset and intrinsic power split in the reasons as to why he can create such strong and effective webbing. And as I just said, the fever dream actually parallels certain mutation plot threads that serve as a large element to this show's grander narrative. Furthermore, the fact that this is revealed to us alongside a terminally ill child who looks up to Spider-Man is such a blend of sad and wholesome that it really earns the emotional impact points. In addition to that, the background and future elements of this episode all center around a crisis of faith Peter is having, and even targeted amnesia/brainwashing at the hands of Dr. Octopus, both of which are restored due to the actions and belief of this child, the origin serving as the backbone to what drives Spider-Man to heroism. This whole 2-episode story has so much heart to it and reinforces how driven towards good Spider-Man is, but how he needs that motivation coming from the people that need him. As much as I love that narrative framing for conveying the origin story to the audience later in the series, my favorite version of this is by far the Spectacular Spider-Man episode titled Intervention. Again, there is quite a bit of grander storyline context to this, but essentially this iteration of Peter Parker is going through the ever-popular symbiote bonding story arc. The symptoms of allowing an alien to inhabit your mind are starting to show through more violently, as Peter begins to adopt more brutal fighting tactics, dons a callous attitude, and begins pushing away those around him. It all culminates with the famous church bell scene, although in this timeline, the symbiote is far more aggressive in how it fights back against Peter. Trapping him inside of a symbiote cocoon, the battle is now waged within Peter's mind. The colors fade to black and white as Peter's consciousness relives the memories surrounding the most momentous days of his sophomore year. It's quite interesting to see Peter's behavior, as in many ways this is the modern Peter Parker living through the lens of his past self. The environment and transitions are all very dreamlike as well, creating for this nice blend of abstract and psychological storytelling. As Peter is reluctantly dragged through his origin story, one thematic parallel to what is occurring in modern day becomes clear: Peter's relationship with power. Just as Peter once let his newfound spider abilities get to his head, he has been letting the power the symbiote offers poison his mind as well. And at the climax of this memory realm, the moment Peter discovers who killed his Uncle Ben, that's when the symbiote steps in, manifesting as the black version of the Spidey costume. The symbiote comes with messages of solipsism, attempting to persuade Peter away from guilt and to hate the world that forces him to suffer. Just as he reaches out to accept the symbiote's comfort, the memory manifestation of Uncle Ben steps in. It becomes clear that the symbiote brought Peter to his past memories as a method to break his will, but the memory of Uncle Ben is now fighting back with a will of its own, bringing to light the scene where he says with great power there must also come great responsibility, in a way that directly mimics the Toby version. The symbiote persists in its pessimism, claiming that the words meant nothing due to the fact that they didn't change the actions that followed. Uncle Ben's rebuttal is this:
Watch him take his vengeance.
I should drop you. Take what you took from Ben Parker. But he wouldn't approve. With great power comes great responsibility.
Just as it seems Peter is claiming retribution by hurling the burglar out the warehouse window, he catches him, claiming that Uncle Ben wouldn't approve. I love this moment because it so clearly and powerfully demonstrates the inception of Spider-Man's merciful attitude even towards those that commit evil. The entire setup with the memory of Uncle Ben forcing the symbiote to watch it in order to prove Peter's worth in complete independence of its influence was an amazing artistic choice as well. Peter's faith in his self-worth becoming restored, we get a montage of everyone Spider-Man has helped to save up to this point, all of which have nothing to do with the symbiote's corruptive power. Clearly, the existence of Spider-Man has brought good into this world. Still, the symbiote continues to try to convince Peter that he is isolated, entirely alone if without it, to which another montage appears, all of Peter Parker's allies. Revitalized, Peter dons his colorized costume and squares off with the alien inhabiting his brain. Aided by Uncle Ben's memory and the collective of everyone else important to him, Peter succeeds in ejecting the symbiote from his mind. This right here might just be my favorite Spider-Man episode of all time, but it is certainly my favorite way the origin story has been conveyed. It encapsulates everything about the foundation of both Peter Parker and Spider-Man, while providing an emotionally impactful war against one's own mind and an alien invader all at once. Pair that with the metaphorical visuals and memory embodiments, and this is one of the greatest Spider-Man stories ever put to screen. Both cartoons discussed use a crisis of faith moment as a catalyst for the reveal of the origin story, which I find to be the perfect conduit of narrative delivery. Both were very different in context, but both pulled it off beautifully. But what do you think? What was your favorite portrayal of the classic Spider-Man origin story? Maybe it didn't even appear in this video, and if it didn't, do make sure to let me know in the comments as I'd be happy to check it out. As for now, if you like my methods of storytelling, I'm always excited if you check out my series of fiction novels on Amazon or become a channel member of the Lore Totem tier to access the audiobook versions of them. Things that you can do entirely for free that help me out are, of course, liking and subscribing, joining my Discord server for news and discussion, or giving the podcast I co-host with my sister a listen. Links to everything are in the description. I hope you'll visit my web again soon, and until then, keep spinning yours.